we are, yeah, and you can probably see up in the corner that it is live, so.
Okay, live. Yeah, I see that live on YouTube.
All right, redirecting to YouTube. Okay. And everything is about on a 20-second delay, so.
Okay. So people type in questions. We have to wait. There's a delay.
All right, and I am just going to share that link out really quickly. All right, sorry, just sharing it real quick.
This doesn't tell me how much battery power I have left either. I was at about 75% when I came in.
You should be okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that is out. We have got people watching now. So
Okay.
we've got people joining. We'll give people a few more minutes since, again, it is on a little bit of a delay. So luckily, you know, but they can see us all now. So we can.
Tony, I just sent you a picture of my screen.
Okay.
You can see there's nothing on it. No icons.
Oh, I see. So you at home and you go with, okay. Okay. All right. I see how that's working. Okay.
All right. So we've got about, yeah, we've got a good handful of people in the live stream now. So I'm going to go ahead and get
Can
started.
you tell who those people are?
I cannot see who they are. No, I just know, I can just see, oh,
Okay.
We've got Ari Greenberg from Brooklyn. So we've got some people joining us and starting in the chat. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us with Row House Cinema, Tony Buba and Gary Cavalli as we talk with Tony Buba about Tony Buba. So tonight we are, please feel free to ask questions in the YouTube comments, but Gary, one of Tony's friends and another dedicated member of the Pittsburgh film community, will be moderating. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the YouTube chat and I will do my best to communicate that to Tony. So Tony Buba, welcome, and Gary, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we can go ahead and get things started.
Well, thank you, Row House Cinema, for putting all this together. I know it's been difficult for your organization in these times, so thank you for doing this.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. This has been something we've been definitely wanting to do. So we're sorry it took it took COVID for us to do it.
Looking forward to your drive-in coming up, right?
Oh yes, our drive-in. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we've got that
I
coming.
mean, you can't bring people into the theater, but you can put them in the parking lot down the road.
Exactly. So yeah, we can do it virtually and do it outside. So we're happy to do those two. And yeah, we were so glad to have Tony's Films as our virtual offering these past 2 weeks. So yeah. But yeah, however
You want to
Gary, I
start?
don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can go ahead and
Okay.
get started.
I don't know, Tony. How do you want to? I'll start when I first met Tony. How about that?
Okay, that sounds good.
It sounds good. Maybe like, I don't know, what was it? When did you make Sweet Sale? Like 1979? Something
Yeah,
like that?
78, 79, yes.
Yeah. I guess I was a member of Pittsburgh Filmmakers back then. We were housed in Oakland in the old Oakland screening room where you could walk up those steps and go into a 55-seat theater there. And it was a media center. And we had members making films there, and also we screened films. We did a lot of collaborative programs with the section of film and video at the Carnegie Museum of Art, Bill Judson there. And he had a director series where he would bring in, international directors once a month, something like that, to screen their films and have discussions. And he brought in, he and we brought in Werner Herzog to screen some of his films. I don't know, probably late 70s. Herzog had probably made Aguirre by then, Strozek, and some of his other short documentaries too, along with his feature films. And the thing that always about Herzog, he always, I think, focused on an individual or an eccentric or an oddball person, both in his feature films and his documentaries. Those documentaries that might have been like the guy who lived on the island with the volcano that was about to explode, or the ski jumper, the ski flyer, or the politicians or the evangelist preachers. But I think Herzog was always charmed by, the oddball, the eccentric. And I forget what we screened that weekend, but we decided he wanted to see some local films. So we set up a Saturday afternoon screening in the Oakland screening room there, with members and people of the public would bring in and show their films to Herzog. Back in that era at Filmmakers, sort of had two maybe types of groups of people that were making films with filmmakers history with experimental cinema. And the members there, were influenced by Brackage and Tony Conrad and Maya Dare and films like that. There were people making these experimental films, let's call them avant-garde films, that were about the process itself, just about editing or about vision or about rhythm or about color. And there was another group of filmmakers, younger people, with Super 8 cameras, Super 8 sound cameras, and they were sort of following the Warhol tradition of making just really, really rough, quick films out of Super 8 film, and cutting them and putting them up on the screen, a la like Beth B and Scott B did in New York during that time when they were playing films in the clubs and jumping around the city. So there were these two types of films that were being made there. And Herzog, if he wasn't very aware of what was going on there, but he was very kind, and people were bringing in their films and showing his films. And I remember him sitting there and looking at these experimental films and making nice comments about them. And also, some of that Super 8 sound punk bohemian like films. And he was, gracious and, commenting on those films. And we were almost over. There was like a couple more films to screen. There's like this guy in the back threading up the 16mm projector. It was Tony, and he showed this film called Sweet Sale. Now it was like 28 minutes, something like that. We sat through Sweet Sale. I'd never seen it before. At the end of it, Herzog went nuts. He just said, "Who is this? Who made this film? I must meet this Tony. We must go out. Let's go out to dinner. I have all these questions for you." And just went nuts, really, about Sweet Sale. And that's how I think Tony became sort of a member, or started participating in with the other people at Filmmakers, because we had never seen your work before. And that Sweet Sale at least introduced me to your work. And did you ever go out with Herzog? And did did he see your films?
Yeah, I did. I did.
And I guess you like Sweet Sale because of the eccentricity of the lead character,
Yeah, I remember I was teaching at the University of Southern Illinois, and I just got back in town maybe 2 days earlier, or 3 days earlier than that.
Really?
And I got a phone call from Joe Siemens, and he says Herzog was screening work. He says, "Bring things down." So I went down there. I remember and I think it was Brady was at there, and I says, "Yeah." Brady said, "How long is this film?" I said, "It's close to a half hour." He says, "Can we only show 5 minutes of it?" I said, "Sure, that's okay." So they put it up, then Herzog wanted to see all of it. Then that's when he went through thing. I have to see more. I must see more. And I said, sure. And I actually had a lot of other my films in the car. And so he looked at them. Then we met for breakfast the next morning, and we had a really long talk. Shame on me. I never kept the contact up, because it was, it was much more difficult then writing letters and
Right.
versus email today. But yeah, and he really kickstarted my career, because as soon as he said he liked it, then I got a screening at the Carnegie in Pittsburgh. Then I did a Cineprobe in MoMA. Yeah, so it really kickstarted my whole career, and it got me involved in the filmmakers.
And was that your first involvement with filmmakers?
That was my first involvement. Yeah, because I think I went there one time, and there was some sort of meeting that was going on, but there was really, because I went to school, I was going to school at Ohio University before that, and we would drive up on May Day to screen films at the museum. We get this guy's pickup truck, everybody in the back with our, back then you just travel whatever you can. There was no worry about seatbelts or anything. Just sitting in the back of a pickup truck, driving to Pittsburgh and doing the screening that Sally Dixon was doing it for the May Day.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, then my films at that time, they also, Sal was the first film I ever got a grant for, and it was through the Illinois Arts Council. And I always had a tough time with arts councils, because at that time the films fell between, weren't quite humanities films and weren't quite what was thought of as an art film.
We have someone in the audience asking what happened to Sal.
What happened to Sal? Well, Sal, we made Lightning Over Braddock, of course. Then we had a big fight, which was for real. And this is he was a little paranoid at times, and he always thought I had a microphone on me and I was recording everything he was saying. So one time he's in front of my house, actually, and he says, I know you're wired. I know you're wired. I stripped down to my underwear on the porch, right, to show I didn't have any mics on me. And what happened, we did fight. So he quit the film. And then it was about a year later, we're both in a hospital together. He was diabetic. So he is there because it was an insulin shock, and I had a gallbladder problem. So he hears my voice, Buba, is that you? so we start talking to each other across from in the emergency room. And we made up as friends, and he ended up dying at home. With nobody around. He was, like I said, diabetic. He really wasn't taking care of himself, and he had passed.
So he and Herzog sort of got your career.
Yeah. Then once he heard of Herzog, and of course he fell in love with Herzog and Herzog's main actor. I'm having a senior moment. It was in Aguirre.
Yeah, Klaus Kinski and
Klaus
Zell.
Kinski. Yeah, he was just fascinated with the story of Klaus Kinski. Herzog and Klaus pulling guns on each other, and so that. But then you can see Sal in one of George Romero's films too, called Night Riders. What I was trying to do, he's in. Yeah, what I was doing at that time, I was really, the idea was sort of blending not blending documentary and fiction, but really mixing it up, and I would try to get all the people who are in my films into Romero films. So I did this film on Gary Peabody. He ends up playing a zombie in a Romero film, and so I had a lot of different people in these that ended up acting, like Jay Roy. He's in a film, a George Romero film called Martin, where he plays a preacher. Yeah, so I was ended up just trying to do this whole extension of what was documentary, what was real, what wasn't, and the extent these I was playing around with all that, even though I never made a film about that, but as I was showing with the people I did documentaries on.
Okay, any other questions?
Not from the audience at the moment, but remember, if anybody has a question, you can ask it in the YouTube chat. But
yeah, when I started doing these series, I mean, at first, I ended up you know, it was serendipity. I came home one weekend because, and J. Roy was going to have a grand opening of a used furniture store. And I knew him for a long time. And I thought this was interesting. You know, have a grand opening of a used furniture store. It's going to be this big deal. It was going to save the town of Braddock at that time. And I came back the following weekend to film it, and I came home on the wrong weekend, actually. And it was the weekend before the grand opening, so I ended up coming twice. And we ended up, you know, and I ended up filming that. And I had a lot of trouble even figuring out at that time my exposure levels, you know, just so new at doing all this. So I did it, and I cut that piece together, and it found some success at film festivals. And then I went back and, you know, started making other films about Braddock. Then I got the idea of just continuing this as a series and following, and like I said, in the footsteps of Apple Shop, where documenting their area. And just, and then Linda Blackby, I showed the films in Philadelphia, and she came up with the Braddock Chronicles. Then it really started to think, what if I did this and just do this for my whole life? And so I try to have each film work as a short, but then when pieced together, you could see this 40 to 50 year arc of one community. That's really what I'm doing and still doing.
What it's like to live at a certain place in a certain time. The Braddock Chronicles. Yeah. Right. And
Yes.
And the thing that we were talking before, and I want to mention about Braddock, I mean, you've made sort of the name Braddock and the town of Braddock famous, but Braddock is sort of doesn't just exist on its own. It's one of many of those steel towns down along the Mon that have all gone through the same thing once the mills closed. I mean, you can start with like the South Side and Hazelwood and Homestead and Clairton and McKeesport and Menneson and Duquesne and Braddock. They all populate the river as it, you know, flows down to Pittsburgh. And it's just amazing. It's an amazing valley that you have so many of these very distinct communities that are all going through or have gone through the same thing at the same time over the past 40 or 50 years. What's once a vibrant community, Braddock, where you know you couldn't walk down the sidewalks because there were so many people there, is really similar to those other communities down the valley. So if anyone's interested, not just in what happened in Braddock, but what happened in the industrial Mon Valley of Pennsylvania, that's, you know, Tony's films show a big, wide brush cloth, whatever, of everything that a wide swoop of everything that's gone on over the past 40 years. So, yeah.
And at that time, I returned to Pittsburgh in the late 70s. It was really an explosion of filmmaking being done with the Pittsburgh Filmmakers. And George Romero's career was getting his like second start with Martin and Dawn of the Dead. And so just a lot of creative people and a lot of people available for crew work. And it was, and the Arts Council was generous at that time. So between the Pennsylvania Arts Council, regional media grants, there was a way to actually fund your work and also make a living doing that. Plus, there's so much industrial video, and you were able to survive. Then
and touring around too. You would go on.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was they had the film circuit where you would, you know, in the 70s and early 80s, when you made short films, you were more like a poet, and you had that prestige of a poet making short films. I mean, then with the popularity of Sundance, everything exploded and everybody wanted to do features. But back then, you know, the short film was the king, and nobody questioned you about making short films. Nobody said, "Oh, when are you going to make your first feature?" I mean, in some ways, it's like asking poets, when are you going to write your first novel? You know, I mean, it was a genre unto itself. And now I don't quite know what. I mean, it was difficult back then with the short film. You had festivals, you had the circuit. If you finished a couple, you would travel on. And not quite sure what filmmakers do today with it. I mean, outside of putting it up online.
Right. we've got a question from the audience. Just in terms of when you're, filming and working with all these different communities, do you find that there's a Sal in everyone, like, or a Sally? Do you find these, basically, can you find these figures anywhere?
Well, I think that's what made the films work for this area, sure, and even for other towns, that every community had characters. And and back then you could afford to be a character. Right now it's more difficult. I mean, it's because you could be really eccentric, but still able to have a job. I don't know if that's possible today. I mean, there really is, yeah, I mean, you have characters like Sal and others, J. Roy, but you go up and down the Mon Valley, they were there. I mean, Braddock is really a microcosm, and that's how I looked at it the whole time, is that it's this town that's, less than 1 square mile. And within it, you had everything that was going on. And it's still true today. I mean, you ride in Braddock and you come into town, and one end of town's a free store giving away clothing or food. And the other, it's closed right now because of COVID. The other end of town is a restaurant where you can spend, $200 to $300 a person on a meal. So you have the whole split in the U.S. And you're just right in one drive from when you come into town to when you exit town. And it's, and to me, it was one of the first towns with the mills to be industrialized. Then it was also one of the first communities to be deindustrialized, even though the deindustrialization wasn't the total thing for the Braddock's demise. A lot of it had end up doing with the parkway being built and just the explosion into the suburbs, redlining, where African Americans weren't able to move out to the suburbs. So there was a lot of issues that would take place, which a film I made called Voices from a Steel Town, people themselves, they directly also address the complexity of the town's decline, and not just as it was a single issue.
We've got some more. How long did it take to create Lightning Over Braddock?
Lightning Over Braddock was probably 4 or 5 years from when I first started shooting, coming up with the idea, then getting funds, and it might have been done 6 months sooner, but I was waiting for the Great Peace March. Larry Evans, who was a character in the Millhonk Herald, he was a regional coordinator for the Great Peace March that took place, and he had it directed to come through Braddock so I could film. So everything in this 4 or 5 year period of making Lightning was geared for Lightning. I'd appear on a TV show, on those news that was on Channel 13, and no matter what the question was, I'd answer the question so I know that I could play it back to Sal to get a reaction. And so everything was so I was playing this character of Tony Buba within the piece itself. Yeah, so Lightning was it was about, like, for most independents, I think that's a normal time span to do to get a film completed. And the film, and what happened, the first cut I had of it, I didn't have any of the old short films in it. And what I did is I went to Kansas City and also St. Louis, carrying one of these big projectors that took both audio and film, those Siemens dual projector that had mag sound on one side, and I show I do 2 different screenings. In the first screening, I show the 3 short films, showed J. Roy, Sweet Sal, and Millhonk. Then I would show the cut I had of Lightning. The second screening, I just showed Lightning. And I did this a couple times, and the feedback I got, I realized I had to incorporate the short films within Lightning Over Braddock, and that took me almost an extra 6 to 8 months of editing.
Let's see. Oh, well, actually, I love the Millhonk Herald, like that, short. Just when I saw that, I just loved it so much. Can you talk a little bit about the background of that?
What happened was, when I first came back, I did a screening at Pitt, and Steve Pellegrino showed up at the screening, and we talked afterwards. He said he's hanging drywall. He's a performance artist, and he was doing these songs about Pittsburgh. And so I went to one of his performances, and he played Jumping Jack Flash on the accordion, along with these boots are made for walking on the accordion, which is both great fits. Then once I saw him make once I saw him perform jumping jack flash on the accordion, I figured, how do I use this in the film? And then I was, working with Larry and Leslie Evans on the Millhonk Herald magazine, and I wanted to make a film about the magazine, but I didn't want to be didactic, but just a piece, informative piece about the mag. So how do I combine everything? Then the Braddock school system, it was actually it was the last year of the school before it closed. And so I talked to the band director at that time if he'd have the band play Jumping Jack Flash. So I got them to come down, and Steve. Then then this film starts off in the white, and white always represents, fade into white is a fantasy that comes in. So I ended up playing with all that, and the sort of the explosion at the end was actually a sound guy tripped and ran into a pole, so it had this explosion. So then I thought of because I had a bunch of different endings. I saw a lot of different films at the Filmmakers, and I first had an ending where I tried to crack glass and break the glass off that would change the image. Another one I set a photo on fire for the ending, but then I went with that explosion sound of them coming down from the mill. Yeah, that was and of course MTV was first coming out at that time too, so I wanted to do a music video.
Oh, I thought that was cooler than about any. Yeah, no, just the coolest and only punk accordion performance I've seen. So, and we've got some more from the audience. Switching. Well, I'll ask this one first since it piggybacks a little bit more. Did you always want to eventually work in documentary, or at least, I know you do fiction
No,
and documentary, but
I got a late start with college. I didn't start college. I was almost 25. I was 24 when I started. Went to Edinburgh. I had a really decent job working at the what was called Wiggins. It was a factory in Homewood, and I had been there over 3 years. My uncle got me the job, and I was making the equivalent of what would be $45,000 a year today. So this is, I was 21, and I was in the National Guard. So I was, so I was like doing meetings and going to and working at Wiggins and making a decent salary. And I started taking night classes at Pitt. And I tell the story a good bit. A good friend of mine, Ernie Spizak, we were both, hadn't gone to college. He was working in the foundry. I'm working in the factory. And you had enough money from working then. I had saved up enough money to buy a brand new Corvette. So we decided, we both had that money. We thought, okay, why don't we try night school? If we pass the classes, then maybe we'll go to college. If not, we'll buy those Corvettes. So I ended up, going to night school and started passing the classes. And then I realized for night school, I wouldn't graduate till I was about 33 or 34. So let me go to school. So I transferred up to Edinburgh, which was probably one of the best. It was an amazing, it was a great decision. I got there and I got a work study job at the campus TV station. I really had no interest in film. I didn't really, you didn't think, being a working class kid from Braddock, you didn't think people actually made a living doing film and video work. You saw those credits, but you didn't know anything about it. So I was at Edinburgh, I had the work study job there, and I met Dave Weinkoff, who was an instructor, and he ran the film. All those universities then had their own film person who made the PR films. And because I was close to Dave's age, he was only 28, he hired me and taught me how to do audio. So then I did all my work study with him, and that's how I started seeing films. I started seeing these films by Third World Newsreel on the Black Panthers and the demonstrations. And I was always fairly political. And so then I started seeing films by Boone Well, and they just really blew me away. And that's when I got the bug. When I was I was probably like 26 or 27 when that's what I decided to apply to graduate school at Ohio University. But it really wasn't anything that was, I thought of them. Then my brother, he came up to visit me. My brother graduated the music degree from CMU. He worked with Porsche Volkswagen, traveling around the country doing these auto shows, and the job had just ended. So he came up to see me for a week. He ended up staying the whole summer, helping me work on this film I was making so I could apply to grad school. And he got the bug too. He came back and started working at WQED, and he ended up getting his MFA through Carnegie Mellon, and he ended up, editing a lot of George Romero films. And probably the biggest film he ever cut was Heat with Al Pacino and De Niro. And so we ended up both getting it in together about the same time, different directions. But it was, it was just one of these things that it happened. It wasn't, nothing was planned.
Wonderful. All right. Sorry to switch topics a little, but next question is, how did you start working with George Romero?
Okay. I started working with George with my brother and John Harrison and Dusty Nelson. They had a small production company they called Voodoo Da, which ended up becoming the Image Works. And it was, I was still in grad school, and there was a sports series called The Winners. At that time, in the mid 70s, there was tax shelter money for people making films. It was a thing where it was going around where if you had a risky business, investors could put money in, and over a period of, and they could write like 5 times off. So you put 10,000 into a film, you could write 50,000 off of your taxes over a 5-year period. So George had got money to do a sports series called The Winners, and they had to be done before 1976. So he had contacted my brother's company, and they started working for him. So everybody was like short on help at that time. So I dropped out of grad school, came back, and worked on worked on a series as an assistant editor. Sometimes I went out doing audio, and hanging out with Rocky Bleier and Terry Bradshaw and all those people at that time. And then so then I got to know George through that. So what happened was that George's camera person had gotten married, and the assistant camera person, Nick Mastandrea, who was working with George too, he ended up was playing Frisbee, and I think he broke his arm or broke his leg. But what happened that George got these sponsor films to do a sponsor film for Chatham College, and also to shoot inserts for an Italian splatter film called Spasmo, Needed More Sex and Violence. So George hired me to help him work on those, and I did, and that's where we became pretty good friends. And then I went back to school, finished my degree, and came back, and that summer we shot Martin, and that's how I got it involved. So then I stayed with him the whole period of time. Then there's then up until I think Day of the Dead, I did sound transfers, but I was doing audio on the other films, and my audio work was fine, but I was not an audio engineer. And as his films got bigger budget and needed more sophisticated type audio work, I really couldn't do that. And so and I realized what my limitations were. So I ended up like assistant editing on Night Riders, and then I started to get a lot of my own grant money, and ended up just working with George and just stayed friends with him.
And so
you mentioned Martin. I guess that the house is still there. You want to give a little bit of background on what many people consider to be Romero's best film?
Yeah,
Martin. Favorite film? Martin
was shot at my mother's house, my house in Braddock, and it was and we were there. It was a sacrifice for my mom and my dad and my grandmother, especially my dad, because he had to still working and he had to get up. I mean, we'd be there to midnight, 1 a.m. shooting, and he had to get up the next day and go to work. And my mother ended up like catering the project. But I have a piece that's online that I did for the Moth Talk. It's called The Vampire, the Rosary, and George Romero. And it's a story about the shooting Martin down at the house in Braddock. So if people go online and just would Google the Moth, Tony Buba Moth, it'll come up.
I'm pretty
and the
sure
house is still there.
The house is still there. Yeah, the house is still there. It's like, there's groups of people that come by, and I think it was just a couple of months, before COVID hit, there was a group of like 20 people came down to the house in Braddock, and the owner calls me up, who are these people? What do they want? He's knocking on the door. They want to go in and take a look at the house. And it's a group of German people visiting the locations. Yeah, Romero fans are hardcore.
I can, speak from experience. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got, is it true that the Rolling Stones made you stop using the song?
They didn't make me stop using. So what happened was that I knew Lightning, there was a chance, I was hoping, that Lightning would have larger distribution. And at that time, it wasn't that much before that Kenneth Anger got into big problems because, after all the years of him using all the rock and roll songs in his films and what's the one with the motorcycles, Gary? I can't think of the title of it.
I know.
But
yeah, getting old.
So someone actually saw it in
Leader of the pack.
Yeah, someone saw it in New York City and saw that he used all these songs, so they went after him, for money and they quit showing. So I thought I'd be a little more careful. So I called the BMI or one of those organizations that handle all the rights, and that's when they told me they wanted $15,000 for it, and I. Yeah, and it's 15. The budget for film might have been 30, and that's when I just incorporated not being able to get the rights into the piece. And one thing about shooting 16 that's a little different than shooting digital is that there's so many limitations that sometimes you have to be more creative to come up with solutions, especially if you don't have the money. Versus if you have, one of the problems with digital, I think, is that you can shoot the rest of your life and not finish anything because it's just going out, reusing that SD card that costs you $35. I mean, and you just shoot more and more, and you end up shooting so much footage that it becomes paralyzing because you don't know where to start. You just have too much material there, and you don't know what you're doing. And there's actually a Herzog line where he talks about this filmmaker. He says, this filmmaker, he comes to me and says, I got 1,000 hours worth of footage. And as I said, and I started to cry, 1,000 hours of material. He says, we are filmmakers. We are not garbage collectors. It was like, but actually it's getting pretty common shooting 1,000 hours now. Right. And having someone go through it.
Yeah, we've got sort of a comment/question. This is from Ari Greenberg. They say, hi, everyone. Speaking of voices from a steel town, my grandfather, Dave Solomon, librarian at the Carnegie Library, is featured in that film. Wondering if you have any Dave Solomon stories to share?
Well, he was my librarian when I was in high school. I mean, Dave, the main story to share about Dave Solomon, he was one of the people and the really people that saved the Braddock Carnegie Library. I doubt if it was without him, the library would have been saved. I mean, he really pushed, he got the community involved and to believe in him. And I have, the footage of him walking through the library. He was an amazing person. And we, and it's an interesting thing because, sometimes you get lucky as a filmmaker because he's walking through, I didn't go with any light, my idea of a light, a flashlight, you throw it up. I mean, so he's walking through the building with a flashlight, this dark area, and he comes to this dead end and just happens a stream of light comes through the window. He says, I think we're going to get open. I think we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, and the light just hits him on his face. Yeah, Dave was really instrumental. Yeah, I think in getting the library going when it first started opening. It was one little room that had space heaters. And he just wanted to have the building open. And now, as you see, it's really it is the central part of the community because they wanted to tear the building down if it wasn't, and they started the group and ended up saving the library. It just shows you, what a community group can do when they work together. But yeah, but I was a bad student, so I really didn't spend too much time in the libraries. So I didn't know Dave that well when he was the librarian, but I knew him as later on with working with him and filming him within the library.
All right, we've got tell the story behind the lightning over Braddock poster design and photo, and that's from Darren DiNapoli.
Okay, well the design was that. There's a couple photos. There's one I wanted the lightning. The whole title was I got from Vin Vendors, He did a film, Lightning Over Water, with Nicholas Reagan, and I saw that film, and I even incorporated similar type scenes where Sal's talking to an audience, and like Nicholas Reagan's talking to an audience in Lightning Over Water. So I got the title Lightning there. Then, that was that's the Kerry Furnace site that I'm standing there, and Joel DeGrand shot the photo, and with a trench in a duster that I got in Nashville, and I had my palm out because what you see in the full poster is a lightning bolt I'm holding a lightning bolt and striking the mill. Back then, there wasn't Photoshop, so everything was like cut out. So the lightning bolt was a cutout. Then we did the post up for the poster. So a lot of times with the photo now, you don't see it. So that was the idea behind that.
We're good on audience questions for a little. Gary, do you have any other points?
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I watched again on Turner Classics, Harlan County, USA, and the great director Barbara Koppel afterwards, where she had a discussion, was talking about how difficult it was to shoot the film and the amount of time they spent down there. But what I found interesting was that she said that she was not a camera operator, but she always worked the audio. She was always the sound person of her films. And she found that being the audio person, it was easier to sort of direct the flow of the film. And I know that your background, Tony, is mainly in audio. And in a lot of your earlier films, you were the audio guy. And I just wanted to know if you could speak about do you feel more control over the film by...
you got to say back then when you're shooting with an Eclair or BL, when you have a body brace on, it's a pretty big piece of equipment. So if you're doing audio and the person that you're filming or interviewing or when you're shooting, they're really looking at the sound person all the time. They're really, because the person's asking the questions. And I found you can't really direct, much harder to direct being the camera person than being the audio person then, because you're there right front. Then you could use, almost everything was on a boom. So I could use the boom pole and the microphone to almost compose my shots. If I start slowly bringing the boom into the shot, that means I want the camera person to go closer, to tighten up. And if I pull back to go wider, if I move around to the right, to the left, I have that person that change their position in shooting. And the people you're interviewing usually relate to the audio person. And there's a strategy I also used when I made Struggles in Steel. Wayne Gaines did the audio in that film because Wayne Gaines is African-American. People were interviewing is African-American. And I wanted them to be looking at, talking to Wayne or talking to Ray. So, because the crew was mixed. And so I found out, once again, we're shooting with an Eclair or a BL. And the camera person is almost hidden by the camera, where the audio person is really out front. So I always thought the audio person was critical. If you don't have an audio person that is simpatico to the people, then you're not going to get that person. So I really think the person, and also, a lot of times you end up doing audio. It's almost because, when you start out, everybody wants to be the director or they want to be the camera person, and the audio person is like the third wheel. Well, who's doing pickup game? And you're trying to do, okay, Tony, you play right field, because it wasn't any good. And you end up doing audio, and there's always seems to be a shortage of audio people. So, and now this change with digital, the cameras are so much smaller that it's changed that dynamic. So especially when you're going out with a small rig. If you're going out with a really large rig, then I think it'd be the same. The audio person would be the person to relate to. But now I sort of just go out by myself sometimes, and most of the time we're just a Panasonic GH4 or GH5.
We do have another one from the audience. Mel Packer asks, when making community-based documentaries, how do you deal with folks in your films who think you're making a bunch of money off their work, even if you're not? Has this ever happened with others?
The only person it ever happened to was Sal. He thought I was
Sal,
making
right.
a lot of money.
I made you the,
It was like, he thought that I was making a lot of money on screening the films, and nobody else ever thought that. Yeah, it really hasn't come up. I mean, it's doing it. I don't know if people more sophisticated now really know that, you know, unless the film really hits really big, there is no money. And even, you know, if it does hit, you almost end up breaking even, because Struggles and Steel has probably been financially the one that's generated the most income. But if it hadn't been for the grant money, it still hasn't generated the amount of money that the grant money ended up that was used to make it. I mean, and it's done fairly well in the circuit. Yeah. So really, it really hasn't been the problem. When you're working in the films, I mean, one is that you have to build, you know, there's a trust that takes place with the filmmaker. And then there are, I was talking about this earlier today, there are images I have which I've never used. I have images of Braddock Council one time when it was really divisive, of people fighting on council. I mean, literally fighting, person picking up the tables and chairs and throwing them at everybody. And I've had this footage in tow for like the last 25 years, 30 years, because what do I do with it? I mean, I could cut a film together, but what would be the purpose? I'd hit festival circuit because they, wow, this is amazing. But what would it mean for the community? Nothing. So until I can find a context to use it, I mean, I just won't use it. It'll just be sitting there in archives, and maybe in 20 years from now, someone else can find a way to use the material. But yeah, that's, so it's always, you know, it's always there, that whole, you know, what is exploitation, what isn't? I mean, the question, those dynamics. And the truth is, no matter how much you really work within a group or with the community, because you're the editor, you really have the final say, which I play around with in Lightning when it shows me editing, because I'm the one who can rearrange the footage. You know, Sal has no control. I mean, it's sort of like I was getting at within that piece in terms of who has the power. My power over Sal was similar to what U.S. Steel's power was over the workers.
And I guess, you know, since we're getting to like the last 10 minutes and talking about sort of the ethics or talking about exploitation and different types of things, like, can you talk a little bit about like maybe what you think the role of the artist or filmmaker in today's landscape might be, or
Wow, I mean, sometimes I do think artists overestimate their role in the landscape. I mean, it's it's really, it's tough. And what is tough in all of it is when you make films is how, when you do a subject, how do you make, like, most actions that take place in a community are collective actions. But if you make a film and the artist tries to portray collective action, it's really difficult to get it out there, because people, especially in this side, I mean, like he's thinking, like quirky people that I've done, we really want to see one individual come out as the hero. And you know, there's such an individualistic society that we try to make a film that has collective action in it is hard. It's really much harder to get it out there. And the art, well, not sure. Hopes. And the artists within the community, I mean, it really has to be involved. It is, you know, I think a lot of arts funding is dried up. I remember when I was on the arts panels, one of the big questions was artists would always complain about there not being enough money. But artists also then at that time really wanted to isolate themselves and work alone. Then how can you, you know, expect the community to support your work or put up tax money if you want to be, you know, just work on projects that you want to work on? So it's, you know, there's that conflict that goes on all the time. And we're talking also about Braddock versus the Mon Valley. When Braddock has been unique in one way is the amount of artists that have come from Braddock. Going back to Thomas's Bell, we wrote Out of This Furnace. Then you had you had the Pica brothers, Joe and John, and Joe Pica was, I guess he's semi-retired now or retired, but he did all those, he did Space Jam as a movie, but he also did all those Michael Jackson commercials and all the spots that were on the Super Bowl. Then I think like Goldie Hawn's family was originally from Braddock. Joe, he directed Ulysses in the 60s, and I'm going to blank on his name, but he did a film called Interview with My Live Veterans, and that won an Academy Award, and he was originally from Braddock. My brother, who became this film editor, is Braddock, and right now we have LaToya Ruby Frazier, who is the best artist I think ever to come out of Braddock. So there is really a tradition somehow in that little one square mile, less than 1 square mile of artists coming from that town.
That's amazing. We have a follow-up question about something earlier, actually. Speaking of archiving things, where is/will your work be archived?
I'm working on that with Emily Davis from. She does archival work, and it's actually all going to be archived at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I taught there 1 year, and they have a great archival section. And Jill Godmiller, I don't know if you know her as a filmmaker. Jill is an amazing filmmaker, and she did Antonio, Portrait of an Artist, many years ago. That she also did a film which influenced Lightning Over Braddock called Far from Poland, which is about Lech Walesa and the revolution that took place there with Lech Walesa, and she couldn't get into Poland to film it, so she did this whole film Far from Poland, they have her work, and they also have the work of Emile D'Antonio, who did In the Year of the Pig, and those ones. So and they have a great film studies department. Plus, they have a brand new building that is approved. So they asked me if they could have the work, and I said, yeah, sure. So I've been organizing it, and I've got almost everything out there yet now. Just got to get my personal papers plus some few things I haven't transferred. And my idea is, what I want to do is have the original material archived there, but I've been getting everything digitized because I'd like to work with them when this is all done to have everything online available for other filmmakers and video makers to use. Because it makes no sense to do this whole career of doing this material and then it's not available for people to use to make their own films to follow up. I mean, I've already had stuff, licensed to other filmmakers. Like I did the film called We Are Alive, The Fight to Save Braddock Hospital. Well, there's this group that's making a film, it's called In Hospital, about hospital closures, and they approached me about getting material when they tore the Braddock Hospital down. So I know there could be like an afterlife to these projects, through the films that people can use, especially Struggles in Steel, because we only use a small portion of the interviews in the film. There's like at least 70 hours of material there that they'll be able to be accessed. So I hope to have that up on a digital platform before I leave this earth.
That sounds wonderful. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So if there are any final audience questions, go ahead and ask them now. If not, I don't know, Gary, if you want to wrap up with anything, or Tony, if there's anything you want to end on.
I have a quick question just about, since we're talking about community.
Yeah.
And in brief, your early films, Tony, you're sort of observational with Compassion, The Sweet Sail, The Mill Hunk Herald, Betty's Corner Cafe. Those are my favorite of your early films. And then, at one point you become more of an activist in the content of your films, or at least obviously an activist with Mill Hunk Herald and Struggles in Steel. And at what time, or when did how did that happen? I keep on thinking about Larry Evans and the Mill Hunk Herald, and what you were saying about Steve Pellegrino. Right around that time, did you become more of an obvious activist than in your earlier films?
Yeah, I always thought the films were for me, they were always political when I first went into them. Even J. Roy, I thought was, the whole idea of how difficult it is for a small business person to survive in a capitalistic society and everything, and then the absurd take on the American dream of a opening of a grand furniture store, grand opening of a used furniture store was going to save it, and that sort of whole entrepreneurial type spirit. So it's always, I thought about those in Marxist terms, in terms of doing it. And then the same with Betty's Corner Cafe, of these guys that were drinking, these working class guys drinking it. I mean, it was less than it really sort of depends on the subject really ends up dictating. I mean, the most one where I'm most in is the We Are Alive, the Fight to Save Braddock Hospital, which in some ways is almost a found film, because using found footage, because Miranda Wadzinski, she shot almost all of it. I had no idea what people were shooting. I just gave the cameras out because I really got involved with the community trying to save the hospital, and the film was like secondary to that. So we end up doing. So I'm really in that a lot as the filmmaker, as the thing. And I've always been a character in my films. Whether you look at the pieces, you'll see me in the shots, or you'll see the boom and everything and all that, because influence with Bertolt Brecht and in the whole playing with the fourth wall, that kind of a thing. But then sometimes you just really have to get in there and realize your role of an activist is more important than your role as a filmmaker, which I played around with that one in a short film called Braddock Food Bank, where I just use stills and text on screen, asking the question and having the audience decide, should I raise money to make a film about food banks, which would be popular at festivals at that time, or should I just give the money to the food bank so it could feed people and save lives? I mean, so you end up getting into those moral decisions, which sometimes is tough for a documentary filmmaker.
And sort of talking more about community, let's see, let me find the question. Where'd it go? There it is. From Jay Walker, asks, how are you connecting with youth, students, and whatnot?
Well, I mean, I haven't taught it. I haven't taught in a while. I mean, in terms with youth and students, I really I think the sort of the last group of students I had, they're probably in their mid 30s. So they're moving right along in age. I mean, I look at different works from students if they want to send them to me. Yeah, but that is it's different. What I really miss about not being involved in a university setting or in settings where there's a lot of young artists is what they're doing, how they're seeing things. And what influenced me a lot in those years ago is not documentary films I saw, but experimental work, and how they played with negative space, what they played with text on screen, what were they using for structure, and of doing that. And I feel that right now I'm lacking that because I'm not around, especially now with COVID, I'm really not out there, and really missing what the Pittsburgh Filmmakers was to Pittsburgh, because there was such energy and explosion at those late 70s and early 80s, and the amount of people making films in Pittsburgh, from the Super 8 punk scene to 16 to Romero. It was, and you had the filmmakers being a place people could go to, or even Romero's office, you can go down there and hang out all day. And you just, listen to people's ideas and bounce ideas off of other people. And I do miss that. I mean, you can do some of it as like a salon, but that's almost too structured. I mean, it was stuff with more just where you go somewhere and just get into an argument, about work or looking at work and feeding off of other people's energy. I mean, like the person you see in Milhunk and also in Lightning Overwritten, the Talk of Voskalov. I mean, she had an amazing energy to her, and there was a whole group like that. And Gary running around with his Super 8, and it was just an amazing period. And I'm sure it's going on now with digital, but I don't know if there's, I mean, you could afford your own equipment and everybody has their equipment in their house versus having to go somewhere and being in a space that other people with. I mean, and maybe it's just because I'm used to working one way that that I find that lacking. You know, I mean, other younger filmmakers probably. I mean, you look at it, there's still. I mean, like Chris Ivey, I think, is a great example of someone who's doing a lot within, you know, with the East Liberty Project. And Chris, you know, I consider Chris a younger person, but of course, if you're in your 18 or 20, Chris is not a younger person.
Speaking of recent stuff too, Mel Packer asks, you've been getting footage at protests. What's the plan for that?
Yeah, I actually, there's, I spent a whole year just not, going so like this, I was documenting it. And actually, I'm going to work on Tuesday. We're going to try for how to, because we like have a half-hour piece on different protests for a whole, we call it a Europe protest in Pittsburgh. And originally, one of the pieces is going to be with the Wexner Arts Center. The Wexner had commissioned a group of filmmakers, including myself, around the world, to shoot films on protests, to shoot a film on a protest. And it was to emulate Godard and Truffaut in 1968, when they went out with their cameras during the Paris protests and shot with the Bolexes, 2.5 minutes. So the thing on these films that you had like a limit, you had to show where it was shot, and it was 2.5. Yeah, it was 2.5 minutes. It had to be under 2 minutes and shot in one day. And so they're going to use a piece I sent them where I happened to go down with Beth Hallam. There was a group of people meeting in front of the county courthouse that were trying to get the Allegheny County Council to vote to have a police task force for the county to oversight it, because it was after the Antoine Rose shooting. So I went down there, and I didn't have a camera with me, but they were protesting outside. Beth was speaking, and Tim Stevens and other people. So I shot it with with the camera, and then Tom Dubinsky ended up editing. So we ended up doing it, and it ended up working well, because once you get the limitation of shooting with an iPhone, so we have split screen, still photos, and everything's is cut with all within that frame of doing it. So they're going to use that piece that'll tour around the country with these other films on protests, and and it's a piece, he said, that really ties everything together, because it got voted down, and then we saw what happened later on this year.
So how can people, when and how can people?
I'm not sure. I'll let you know, and you could put it up when it goes, because the Wexner, of course, with COVID, is supposed to be like this big thing that was going to go on in October in Columbus, Ohio. They're using, because we'll have a gallery show, because I know they're showing one of my other short films in a gallery setting, the Braddock Food Bank. But I think it'll end up being a touring show. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I believe that's all the time we have, but is there any final wrap up thing or?
No, I just want to thank everybody for supporting my films for over all these years, and I hope I can keep making them, and I hope I can finish them. I can keep making them. I hope I can get some finished, I guess would be the real answer.
Well, you've got lots of people who are saying hello and everything in the chat, and we are just so grateful that you're here in Pittsburgh. Yeah, it means a lot, especially right now. So just thank you so much, and
well, thank you,
Gary, for joining us as well.
Okay.
And,
Kino Pravda, Tony Buba.
Kino Pravda.
Yeah, we have people saying your films and teaching were super impactful. Such a great storyteller. Thank you, Tony. Thanks to all of you. Lots of thank yous.
Okay. Yeah, I've had some great students over there. I've had some amazing students over the years.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us at Row House Cinema. If you do want to check out any more of Tony's films on our website, they are available through October 1st, and half of the proceeds do benefit the Braddock Library.
Right, and if you don't even want to watch the films, just send a check to the Braddock Library.
Yeah.
just send them a check. The Braddock Library with Dana and Vicky are doing amazing work, and we've got to keep that building going. And they were in the process of doing a real capital campaign, and COVID hit, and so I don't know. So we just need to keep plugging away and get that. Because if anybody wants to, my big real dream is to have the video projection set in the auditorium, and I get to show all my films in Braddock in a proper setting at least one time in my life.
Well, we've all got our fingers crossed, and we hope we can see that sort of thing too. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. And please check out more of Tony's films. Like I said, yeah, like you said, you can just buy them to make your donation, or
You
yeah,
could buy,
check out.
you could buy a complete set from Kino Lorber. They're distributing everything in Blu-ray and also in regular I8, or you can go to braddockfilms.com and just check stuff out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tony.
Okay,
And thank you
thank
so much,
you.
everybody else.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.